was amazing was that if one went near her, one felt the sweetness and warmth. In fact, every time I went to see her, I remembered that line from Savitri, which flashed through my mind: O death, I have triumphed over thee within. Conscious I walk of my immortality. That was the impression that came through her. She was breathless. Outwardly, one would say that the body is suffering, but never a smile. She was never, when one went near her, she would never spare a smile if she could give one. It was something amazing. One of the very first steps, as Aurobindo says, before one can think of an outer change, one has to have this inner change. Before one can talk about conquest over physical death, one must achieve what is called in the language of the Upanishads as the consciousness of immortality. This consciousness of immortality, which comes from a twofold realization. One, of course, something which is nearer to us and dearer to us because it's the sweeter way, is to live more and more in the psychic. And the other sense in which the Upanishad uses the word immortality is to live in the vast. For the vast doesn't die, it cannot. It's only the finite which can die. But it's possible to live in the consciousness of vastness, which death cannot dissolve. But then surely she had followed the sweet and sunlit path. One could see it. The love in the heart. It was that love triumphing over death. For if we take the cue from Savitri and what the mother has said, divine love in human beings becomes love for the divine. And it is that which triumphs over death within. But this is not the usual course. Though this is the expected course, at least of all of us who are here, who have this exceptional privilege. But this is not the usual course in nature. Nature doesn't like to go through the sweet and short and sunlit path. The mother says it likes to wander. It enjoys meanderings. It doesn't mind waste. Of course, at the end, the result is much richer, much more complex. When it achieves the end which it has foreseen, nothing is missed out. No detail is left out. If we see the course of evolution, we can see it very, very interestingly that everything that we find today as already established in the evolutionary course went through many, many stages, sub-stages, before it was perfected in a certain species. One example is, of course, the way dolphins communicate. They communicate purely through sound signals. And they have a whole language. Scientists are studying that they can actually communicate. I think probably they communicate better than human beings because human beings, we know what we have turned this beautiful faculty of speech into. As Mother says in one of her messages, all the time we quarrel, we can't live without quarreling. So one of the things which we use this instrument of speech is to quarrel, to hurl things which are suicidal actually. But hopefully the dolphins don't do that. Maybe they do, but we don't know their language. But just to manifest this one capacity, the scientists say that nature took 4 different steps and stages in 4 different types of fishes before it perfected it in the dolphin. Once perfected, nothing was missed out. The same we see in an owl, the way an owl sees, the way bats fly. In every stage there are many sub-stages. And in the process, there is a lot of waste. Nature doesn't mind it. It's in no hurry, as the mother says. But in human beings, there is a need for hurry. And the need for hurry is for two purposes. One, as human beings, we have become acutely aware of our ignorance. We not only suffer at the moment, we suffer because we imagine what suffering is going to come. This mind has brought a lot of new elements. On one side, nature has created this mind so that we can consciously evolve. On the other side, this very mind, imagine when a goat is being carried for a sacrifice, the goat is munching grass. Till it goes to the altar, it doesn't know that it's going to be sacrificed. It's looking around as if it's some drama going on. But the last moments it knows. But human beings, even when we are being taken for actually munching grass, we are worried what may happen after we have eaten grass. This perpetual, Savitri describes it so beautifully, alone who stares at destiny's unseen face. In Greek mythology, the goddess of fate, Ananke, is shown always as wearing a veil. And none of the gods have seen her face. Only when all the gods retire, then Zeus has the privilege of seeing her face. Future's unseen face. Alone who stares at future's unseen face. Man lifted up the burden of his fate. This is our tragedy, our comedy, if we like. The unpredictability and the awareness of this unpredictability. So it enhances the pain and struggle of the path many fold. And that's why there is a hurry. Nature doesn't mind destroying a civilization number of times. There have been many pralayas. It recreates. It doesn't mind. It lives in the consciousness of, almost the consciousness of eternity. In fact, if we read the ancient scriptures, they say both are eternal, God and nature. It doesn't bother. Millions of years, so what? It's just a passing of a second. But for us, it matters because the passage is painful. So much of struggle, so much of waste. The mother says in one of her, when people asked her, will there be a war? First in 51, she says, we cannot deny the possibility of a war. Then she says, we hope that it doesn't because it plunges an entire civilization into darkness. And then she says, imagine that the whole thing has to be worked out again. The whole process. It's like when we die and are reborn. It takes time, even though we recover the past life, at least the fruits of it. But many years pass before we can recover that process. So too in the civilizations, when they are plunged into entire darkness and chaos, it takes a few thousand years before the civilization recovers. It's very beautifully shown that how these civilizational cycles also have a memory of the past and recover from a previous cycle. There was a movie called Planet of the Apes which speaks about it. How a civilization is gone and another comes up and it recovers some of the things from the past. So similarly, but later on in 65, 66 or around that, when she was asked about the possibility of a third world war, she says, let's hope that the supermind has descended and we don't have that situation. Of course, he says we cannot prevent wars taking place because human consciousness still needs to go through war. There is a very beautiful passage in Essays on the Gita where Aurobindo speaks of that, yes, we want love and peace and harmony. That is the goal of creation. And there must be prophets of love and peace. But then he says, but the fact is that this world is still held by Rudra in the hollow of its hands. And the debt to Rudra must be paid before the world is ready for peace. The heart of man must be ready for peace. It must be ready for love. It must be ready for beauty and harmony. So this is the great and difficult passage. And the mother speaks about the possibilities of conflicts. Last time we were speaking of the various kinds of conflict which are likely to come in the evolutionary journey. And these conflicts are going to have their own fallout in the course of evolution. They are going to have fallout in society in the form of various social pathologies, in the form of various psychological pathologies, and in the form of various physical illnesses. The mother says that scientists are discovering new illnesses. It's true. There are more hospitals, there are more medicines, there are more doctors, and unfortunately there are more illnesses. Earlier there were few medicines, the red mixture and the green mixture. There were few illnesses, sore throat, diarrhea, at most malaria. When people came to know about cancer, of course TB, few things. When they came to know about cancer, it was like a big thing. But today we have all kinds of things. And the latest one being the swine flu. There is already a swine flu alert issued. And they say that if this virus really, it's mutated, and if it spreads, it can wipe out masses of humanity within a short period of time. Recently in Pondicherry there was a swine flu alert meeting. So it's amazing that new forms of things are coming up. And mother says that it's because, in fact she says the doctors don't know why, perhaps I know why. This is divine humility. She uses the word perhaps. And then she says it's because of the conflict of forces which are taking place. And they are taking place within the human body. The whole body has to adapt to the evolutionary pressure. 9/10 of us is still animal, despite all the knowledge we have. And this little 1/10 which is open to the new light has to struggle against immense forces from the past. Not all of these forces are bad. Some of them have to be transformed, some have to be reintegrated, some have to be expunged and annihilated out of creation. And it's a very, very difficult, complex process. We cannot imagine. We can take an analogy in this process of delivery of the new world. There is, of course, because all nature is built on a single plan, as Aurobindo says, so the analogy really, to a large extent, falls true. That this process of birth of a new world is very much like the birth of a child. It has several stages. First stage is the conception. And slowly the child fetus grows, the first trimester, the first 3 months. It's the stage of utter unconsciousness. That which is inside the womb is like a little living flesh, that's all. And doctors know that this is the stage when maximum abortions take place. Nature doesn't allow. Many won't go on to the second stage. They're not ready. So they are expelled out before they reach into the second stage. This is a stage when there is only a very material kind of link from the outer mother who is conscious that there is a baby in the womb. The baby is unconscious and it's surrounded by a womb, a sheath through which everything is passed. The second stage, when there is some kind of a consciousness, there is the heartbeat which is felt, and it is said, scientists who have done experiment, they say that, well, in the second trimester, the baby is listening. So if you play good music, the baby picks up this music. There are a lot of studies which have been done, and it responds to those vibrations which are in the environment, some kind of a sense perception. And then the third stage, when the baby is almost ready for the deliverance, and the deliverance takes place. Just before deliverance, what happens? Lot of pain. There is pain, and there is a narrow, difficult passage. If somebody were to use logic and imagine that this baby has to pass through a narrow passage, one would say just not possible. And yet nature does it millions of times. most of the time successfully. Sometimes, when the baby tries to use its own intelligence, if one may say so, it turns around or it holds on to the cord, or rather the cord holds it around. Things don't work out. Now, with the intervention of the mind, this is one kind of delivery, the nature's process. There is another kind which is intervention. A direct personal intervention which is called a cesarean, and the other which is through some medication, which drugs, etc., which hasten the process. Now, this of course not a class in obstetrics, but this analogy is very useful. We see that the new creation is conceived as a little seed plot in and around the ashram. The new creation is conceived. The new creation to be doesn't know what it's in for, but the parents know. The divine parents know that, why. So they call all the elements. This is the womb of nature which hides the divine seed is the womb of ignorance. It doesn't know who is the divine mother. It doesn't know who is the Lord. So we see many questions being asked. Who is the mother? Why do you say she is the mother? It's very interesting that today we don't ask, many of us don't ask this question. We just naturally feel that she is the divine and that's the end of it. But when we look at those times when human consciousness is not ready, it's nobody's fault. The human consciousness is not yet ready. It's so much entrenched in ignorance that it cannot recognize. It cannot recognize the divine as avatar. It has to ask. It's not yet ready to understand that mystery. Then there is the next stage when there is a direct perception. And then the third stage, and then the delivery of the new world. We see how during the years 52, 53, 54, 55, we don't know, but when we see the mother's messages, she was speaking of the acute difficulties. Even the ashram went through what difficulties? We cannot imagine the world war, the kind of money situation. Now, of course, things are much better. But we cannot imagine the way things were or would have been. That even the soap which Champaklalji had saved, mother once asked for them because there was acute financial crisis in the ashram. So it's a very beautiful reminiscence that Champaklalji brings those soaps and they are all very, very beautifully kept, so beautifully folded and everything. And when he shows it to mother, mother says, I don't have the heart to take it. You keep it with you. When she sees it, she says, I don't have the heart to take it. But we cannot imagine this was the situation. Things have become much better because of that painful process. But the same process repeats in many cycles. It has to repeat now in larger and larger sections of humanity. The same process. Men who are unconscious, covered by ignorance. This is the dark womb Aurobindo describes in Savitri. This is the dark mother in whose womb we have hid from too sudden an exposure to light. Human consciousness is not ready, so for a long, long time nature hides her in the womb of division, what is called in the Puranas as Diti. Diti is the first mother. She gives birth only to Daityas. She is the divisive consciousness. So human beings, we for a long time are hidden in this womb of nature. This womb of nature which hides the divine child is composed of what? The mind, the thoughts, feelings, sensations, everything is divisive. Our thoughts are divisive, our feelings are divisive, our passions are divisive, our impulses, our very breath is divisive. So we count one breath after another. Our very heart beats. Everything works on the principle of division. Because that's how this is the dark womb. And we live and grow in that consciousness. And we don't know what is beyond this womb. The great mother who holds us all in this womb of nature. Nature itself is something which she has created within herself for her play. Nature is no ugly evil. It is something which she has created within herself for her play. and it holds the baby just as within the womb this child is held. So this nature's womb of ignorance, womb of division in which the human consciousness grows for a long time. Now in the first trimester, not every human consciousness is ready for the next stage. Last time we read about, the mother says there is a whole part of humanity which is nature's abortive attempt. Human beings by their very nature are transitional. So there is a whole section of humanity which the mother says will go. There is no choice. It's not ready to go from first stage to the next. It is very unconscious. It is deformed. In fact, this is well known that the babies which are spontaneous abortions of nature are those children who have congenital abnormalities. So there is a whole mass of humanity which is perverse, which is developed in mind but stunted in the heart, which cannot feel. Of course, outwardly it's not deformed, but inwardly it's deformed. There are many things which are missing. There are two kinds of deformation. One is the deformation where there is a development of mind, but nothing here. This is the asuric kind of humanity, which is very, very brilliant here, but here it is like a dwarf. So with its ingenious mind, it can create all kinds of technology which can destroy the whole earth in a few moments. But it doesn't have this to feel. Aurobindo has these 3 poems on science, where one of his poems he says, "How shall ascending nature near its goal? Not through man's tardy, stumbling intellect, impatient all forms and powers to dissect, but through the surer vision of his soul." How will ascending nature near its goal? Not through the tardy, stumbling intellect. Because intellect takes us through mazes and mazes. And it's all right if along with that there is a commensurate development of the heart. But there is a whole mass of humanity which has this developed but nothing here. There is another kind of humanity which has developed its gigantic appetites. Passion for food, passion for wealth, passion for power, passion for sex, but nothing here and nothing here. This the Rakshasic type, if we can use the old metaphors. It has gigantic appetites, but very little here and very little here. So this is another kind of humanity. And the mother says this whole perverse humanity would collapse under its own weight. But there is another kind of humanity which is open to the new forces, and that will be lifted. So from the first stage, there is a humanity which graduates into the second stage. It begins to feel, sense. And there is that beautiful message of the mother for this humanity which is in the second trimester of new pregnancy, if one may use the word. The message is, a new world is waiting to be born. A new world based upon truth, refusing its old slavery to falsehood, is waiting to be born. In all countries there are men who sense it, who feel it, at least sense it. It is to them we call, will you collaborate? So there is a whole mass of humanity which feels that there should be a new world based on truth and not on falsehood, which believes in the deeper sensibilities. And it is to them that the call goes, come, enter into the third stage. And then this difficult passage, this conflict of forces, and yet it will be delivered through this passage, because at the end of the tunnel there is light. This passage the mother describes in some of her writings and talks. Of course, I have picked up, because it was handy reference, I have picked it up from this book, beautifully edited book, Integral Healing, but this of course from some of our conversations. We are at a moment of transition in the history of the earth. It is merely a moment in eternal time. But this moment is long compared to human life. So this transition, the human child is delivered in 9 months. This divine child probably will take 9 centuries for the full delivery. So the passage is long. Matter is changing in order to prepare itself for the new manifestation. This scientists are declaring now. When I had completed my medicine, we were told that nerves, once they develop to the full, they don't develop further. Today, the whole thinking has changed. They say there is something called neuroplasticity. And even patients with stroke can recover completely because these nerves can change constantly. This is a new discovery. It's a very remarkable discovery. Sounds very simple, but it opens very many new doors. We'll not go into that, but she's saying matter is changing. But the human body is not plastic enough and offers resistance. Probably like the baby which is to be delivered, it doesn't know. It finds this passage constricting. Of course, if we take the analogy a little more, there is a cesarean deliveries also. So there is a sunlit path when we offer ourselves to the divine surgeon and he can deliver us without pain and see that everything is fine, but that is very rare. This is why the number of disorders and even incomprehensible diseases is increasing and becoming a problem for medical science. Of course, we have a very simple way of getting out of the problem. All that we got to do is to label a new name. H1N1 virus. So, the mind is wondering, some scientists have made some great discovery. Ask them what it means. They'll say, we don't know. It's just a name. So we have one kind of blood pressure, hypertension. Now we have 10 types of hypertension. So it's a label. So doctors know how to come out of all difficult situations. But that doesn't solve the problem. The remedy, what is the remedy? The remedy lies in union with the divine forces that are at work. The divine surgeon is at work. And these divine forces are working in both ways. Contraction and expansion, destruction and creation. They are working. And a receptivity full of trust and peace which makes the task easier. So we are like little babies in the womb of Diti, the dark mother, being delivered completely to Aditi, the divine mother. We know that she is there, and if we can surrender ourselves with trust and peace, she will do it for us. Mother says further, one thing seems obvious, that humanity has reached a certain state of general tension. Tension in effort, tension in action, tension even in daily life. We have so many courses, crash courses. There are people who capitalize on others' tension. Doctors have become rich in the last decade only because they have to write stress buster course, stress relief course. They do nothing special. They just, teach some asanas and postures and pranayam, which everybody knows in India, but we don't trust it, Sometimes it must come branded with the scientific stamp. So it's very impressive, So we have all these stress relief courses. People become rich out of that. That's not our business. But she's telling us the real reason for this tension is the labor pain, the birth pangs of a new world. The reason is nowhere else. With such an excessive hyperactivity, such a widespread agitation, that the human race as a whole seems to have come to a point where it must either break through the resistance and emerge into a new consciousness, or else fall back into an abyss of darkness and inertia. She's writing this in 50s. We can't imagine. Pondicherry was a very, very slow pace at that point of time. We think she's writing it for now. People who, during that time, they say, oh, it was so beautiful, so peaceful. Now we have all these, high-tech machines and malls and all these cars and taxis. But then we had this, this very beautifully described in Nirodha's talks and other places. This, I don't know the French pronunciation. It's push, it was pushed So that was the, eco-friendly rickshaw. No noise, nothing. And then she is saying humanity has reached a state of tension where it must burst. How much ahead of time the mother saw it. This tension is so complete and so widespread that something obviously has to break. This just before birth, the womb breaks. And the first signs, pains start. Labor pains of a firstborn last for 24 to 48 hours. This may well last, who knows, for a couple of centuries. It cannot go on in this way. We may take it as a sure sign of the infusion into matter of a new principle of force, consciousness, power, which by its very pressure is producing this acute state. What a strange thing she is telling us. We often say, oh, all this is degeneration, so much tension human beings are living in. Where is the new consciousness? Where is the new birth? Mother is saying, this is the sign. The very fact that there is so much of tension, stress, strain, this is the sign that something is compressing humanity. This womb has become small. The baby has become big. It must come out. So something within our consciousness has become bigger and larger. But human nature has become too small. It cannot express adequately. Outwardly, we could expect the old methods used by nature when she wants to bring about an upheaval. Nature's methods are nature's methods. Destroy, doesn't matter. We'll bring out new things. But there is a new characteristic which, of course, is only visible in an elite. But even this elite is fairly widespread. It is not localized at one point, at one place in the world. This is another thing last time also we read, that it's not localized now anymore only to Pondicherry. It is spread over the world. We find traces of it in all countries, all over the world. The will to find a new, higher, progressive solution. An effort to rise towards a vaster, more comprehensive perfection. This struggle, this conflict between the constructive forces of the ascending evolution of a more and more perfect and divine realization and the more and more destructive, powerfully destructive forces that are mad beyond all control, is more and more obvious, marked, visible. And it is a kind of race or struggle to see which will reach the goal first. Last time we read about the whole mental world and the mind. It denies completely the possibility of a new consciousness, of a new emergence. It still wants to perpetuate its old reign. And these forces, precisely because the daybreak is near, the night is darkest. So they are throwing all their Rakshasi Maya and Asuri Maya to cloud the consciousness. It would seem that all the adverse, anti-divine forces, the forces of the vital world, have descended on the earth, are making use of it as their field of action, and that at the same time a new, higher, more powerful spiritual force has also descended on earth to bring it a new life. It's very interesting. In Indian myths we know it. The hour of birth of Krishna is also the hour of birth of Kansa. They are close kins. Even in the names there is only a little difference. Very interesting. Rama and Ravana come together, close. Just before Christ is born, the forces of destruction are at their worst. Every child must be destroyed because the divine child is born. So we see something very similar. This makes the struggle more acute, more violent, more visible, but it seems also more definitive. And that is why we can hope to reach an early solution. So instead of telling us, we despair, she is telling us that we can reach an early solution. And what is that early solution? We'll quickly read this passage and close. We still have 3-4 minutes more. One is to continue the old way. The other is she has opened a new way. The sunlit way with which we started. Do not confuse the higher knowledge and the mental knowledge. This is a letter of Aurobindo. How will nature try to evolve human beings? It will take us through the mind, because that's the process it knows. Nature doesn't recognize the psychic element. It moves like this. From mind we must move to a still greater mind and still greater mind. That's how it moves. So Aurobindo is telling us, do not confuse the higher knowledge and the mental knowledge. The intellectual man will be able to give a wider and more orderly expression to what higher knowledge he gets. The only advantage of a strong intellect is that when the higher knowledge comes, which is not at all the intellectual knowledge which is based on division, it still comes under nature. Nature climbs right up to overmind, what is called as upper earth. The lower hemisphere is right up to the overmind, and we are still at the level of the thinking mind. Of course, there is a reduction of the ignorance. So he says, but it does not follow he will have more of it. He can express better than the Homo psychicus, but it does not follow that he will have more of the higher knowledge. He will have that only if he rises to an equal width and plasticity and comprehensiveness of the higher knowledge planes. In that case, he will replace his mental by his above mental capacity. But for many intellectuals, so called, their intellectuality may be a stumbling block as they bind themselves with mental conceptions or stifle their psychic fire under the heavy weight of rational thought. Again and again we read this. Last time, before that, the mother speaks of this. On the other hand, developed reason is beautiful if it becomes an instrument of a higher light. But if reason believes that it can arrive at the higher light, it errs. On the other hand, I have seen comparatively uneducated people expressing higher knowledge with an astonishing fullness and depth and accuracy which the stumbling movements of their brain could never have allowed one to suppose possible. So there is a way to the higher knowledge which is direct, sunlit. Therefore, why fix beforehand by the mind what will or will not be possible when the above mind reigns? What the mind conceives as must be need not be the measure of the will be. So there are two routes through which the development will take place. In fact, three routes. Through the mind, through occult knowledge, and through heart. Occult knowledge now is coming in the realm of scientific knowledge. And the mother says, of all these three, the mind, the intellectual process, the occult capacities, and the heart, she says, the shorter, swiftest, and the most delightful path is the path of opening the psychic heart. So this is the evolutionary process, and we'll continue this journey next week. Thank you.